this evening. I am grateful for this opportunity to share with you information specific to the second draft of the current proposal for the 23-24 or 2023-24 enrollment plan. To provide some context, on October 18th, staff members presented a second draft of the student enrollment proposal to the Board of Education. The second draft includes updates on the public engagement process and a few changes to the original draft that was presented earlier in September. As a reminder, with no new schools opening for the 2023-24 school year, this year's proposal focuses on addressing overcrowded schools, underutilized schools, as well as seeking opportunities to improve transportation efficiency where possible. The proposal also includes very generous recommendations for stability rules. So as I mentioned earlier, the purpose for today is to go over the draft 2 version of the current enrollment proposal. Just for a little bit of clarification, the large majority of what was shared during draft 2's presentation with the board related to our public engagement process after the release of the initial draft. There are not many new or changed recommendations from draft 1 included, but we will go over all of those with you tonight. We also want to be able to address any questions that you may have related to this draft or the earlier draft or the assignment planning process in general. And so to help with that, we've created 2 opportunities for you to be able to post questions this evening. One method is to use our thought exchange, and we do encourage you to use the thought exchange as this is our official capture tool for public comment for this process. And if you will please use hashtag session5, that'll help us find your specific comments within the thought exchange very quickly so we can make sure we address any of those questions that are posted today. So you can see here, this is the website to get to the draft 2 feedback or the draft 2 thought exchange. And I believe our host has also put this into the chat so that you can copy and paste that directly into your web browser if you'd like to go ahead and start participating in that. So please go ahead and post those questions throughout the presentation. And then what we'll do is we'll hold those questions until we get toward the end of my formal information sharing, and then we'll address as many as we possibly can. And in every session that we've had so far in this process, we've been able to address all the questions that were posed. Another method for presenting questions to us for this evening's virtual information session would be to use the online chat tool. Feel free to use the online chat tool. We will be monitoring that. Our host will be making sure that we catch all the questions that come into the chat. We just want to let you know that those will not necessarily carry over into the thought exchange. And so while we will summarize the essential intent and key takeaways of today's session, your specific comments won't necessarily be included in the full thought exchange. One of the reasons we really like for you to post your comments in the thought exchange is because that way they're captured in your words, phrased the way you intended to phrase them, and that way we're not maybe overly summarizing or overly generalizing a thought or a comment or a question that you might have. Before we move forward, does anybody have any questions, or is anybody having any challenges with how to submit a question using either the chat or the thought exchange?
None so far, Susan.
Okay, thank you, Coretta. Have we had any other members join us that need to be announced?
Doing a double check. No.
Okay. What you see here is the initial screen that we shared with the board on October 18th. We shared with them that our intent for making the presentation during the work session was to share with them the feedback that we'd received so far on the first draft, as well as to share with them a few updates that were being recommended to be included in the second draft. And then essentially what we're doing tonight, what we're doing using the thought exchange, and what will happen later this month, or actually early into November, excuse me, got to get my months straight. Is we'll take all of that feedback together and present it back to the board in a final draft, seeking their final approval and adopting a plan for the 23-24 school year. For those of you that might have joined us a little bit late, we did share a video already that talks through these 4 pillars of assignment guidelines that are held within Board Policy 4150. That video is posted to our website in the resource section of our enrollment proposal area. But just as a reminder, student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency are the 4 core pillars that staff is directed to use as we come up with enrollment proposals, recommendations for assignment changes, and so forth. And while we have to admit that we can't necessarily achieve all 4 in any one particular assignment recommendation, we do try to strike a balance between the 4 when making recommendations for change. So one last chance, just to any questions before we begin about how to post a question in the thought exchange or the chat? Then let's begin. What we want to start with tonight is, before we talk about any of the specific recommendations that we did share in draft 2, we want to spend a little bit of time in that update section. We want to share with you what we heard and what we've learned through the original public engagement process after the release of the first draft. We want to give you a little bit of an update on the capital improvement plan, really more just to give you a concept of where the new projects are located over the next few years. And we also want to talk about the recommended stability rules. And then we'll jump into the revisions to the original draft. And then we'll wrap up with a timeline and some next steps. So as I've mentioned, we've been using a tool called Thought Exchange for our public engagement and public feedback and public comment. And so we want to start first with what we heard through the Thought Exchange in draft 1. And so as we shared with the board, I'll share with you here tonight. Originally, from September 20th to October 7th, we posed the question, what are your thoughts and questions about the proposed changes? And that was specific to the first draft that was released in September. And we had over 2,000 participants, just over 1,400 total thoughts or comments were posted, with a total of 26,468 ratings were secured. What that means is, if you haven't had an opportunity to use our Thought Exchange yet, is the way the tool works is that when you click on the link and you enter into the Thought Exchange, you're first sort of walked through the basic steps of how the Thought Exchange works. You're also presented with some information that we've shared with you directly from our district about the plan that we're asking questions about. There's a handful of hyperlinks to direct you to other sources if you hadn't had a chance to review the plan. And then you enter into the exchange. Once you enter into the exchange, it behaves sort of like virtual sticky notes. The idea that every thought or question or comment or piece of feedback you want to share with staff, you would put on an individual sort of virtual sticky note and then click submit. And then you could make as many of those as you'd like in that first step. Once an individual feels like they've posted as many thoughts or questions as they have on mind, then they move into the second stage. And the second stage is a random shuffling of thoughts that were presented by other individuals already get shuffled before you, and you're asked to rate them with 1 to 5 stars. If you give a thought a rating of 1, it's essentially indicating that you either don't agree with that statement or it doesn't really ring true for you or for your family. And then if you give something all the way up to 5 stars, that's an indication that you really support that comment. You feel like that's a good thought or a good question, or you affirm the sentiment, meaning I agree with this statement, or I really feel like this also speaks to my family's concerns. And what we like about that is that that allows you to see other thoughts and other comments and other questions that the rest of the community are posting that might encourage you to think of other thoughts that you'd like to post. So you can kind of go back and forth between those first 2 steps, post comments, rate thoughts, etc. And then once you feel like you've rated enough thoughts, we always recommend a total of 30 just to help us with our statistical accuracy. Then you move into the final stage of the exchange, which is where you can explore however long you would like and spend as much time as you would like to going through all the different thoughts that have been posted. So not just that random shuffling, but quite literally all the thoughts. There are some sorting and filtering tools. You can rank the thoughts by highest rating, by lowest rating, and you can get a feel for all of the comments and questions that we're receiving as a district. So we like this for 2 reasons. One that I've already mentioned, it allows you to post your thought in your own words and to have it be captured as you intended. And it also allows you to see how others in the community and in the district are thinking about the recommended changes. As you can see in the lower portion of the slide here, we have a little bit of demographic information. We did ask participants to tell us what they identify as in terms of a parent, a student, a staff member, a community member, and individuals were allowed to select more than one option. So those won't add up nicely to 100. For example, if I'm a parent and a classroom teacher, I might have checked both of those boxes, staff member as well as parent. And then the other one that you see that's sort of represented as a pie graph gives us an indication of which parts of the county people indicate that they represent in terms of where they live. And so we recognize that this is a little bit of a soft question in the sense that you may or may not really know where you live. And so you might have just picked something that sounds accurate for you. Or in some cases, we really feel like what's happened on a handful of cases is because Central is listed first. There might have been some people that just selected Central and moved on to the next phase. So we're still working on this element for future thought exchanges and future survey tools to make sure we're capturing accurate data. But really the general idea was to figure out which parts of the county are participating. That helps us to not only know where the comments are coming from, but also maybe areas where we could do a better job of outreach to get more engagement in those communities. So from there, we look at all the thoughts, we apply a little bit of analysis to it, and we start sorting and organizing the thoughts by different themes and topics and groups. And so what you'll see here is a representation of the different types of thoughts and comments and questions that came in based on how many were submitted. So I realize it's very difficult to read all the words on the bottom, so I'll talk you through it. This first bar over here on the left, that's the darkest blue, that's the tallest, represents almost 700 total thoughts, comments, or questions that related to the concept of stability. So clearly our community is telling us stability is very important, at least by volume of comments. The second highest frequency in terms of total number of comments received fell in the category of proximity. So families indicating that a school that's close to home or not wanting to go to a school that's farther away, things like that, those types of comments would fit into this proximity category. The next general category would be calendar change, and that was just over 100 total thoughts, comments, and questions about my new assignment has my calendar changing, and I have thoughts and questions about that. The next highest rated was transportation, so just general concerns about transportation. The next was efficiency, and the smallest column over here, which was the topic of diversity. So here you're seeing the questions and thoughts by total quantity. The next slide then shows you these same categories organized by their star rating. So as individuals were going through and ranking the thoughts and questions, we saw that both proximity and stability came out pretty much even. They both had a star rating of an average of 4.2. So although there were more comments total about stability, when given the comments in terms of the affirmation and the support for the comments, they both balanced out a little bit. Transportation came in right around a 4-star rating on average. Calendar change came in around a 3.8 average star rating. Diversity and efficiency actually switched places, where diversity came in at a 3.5 star rating and efficiency fell just below that 3.5 mark at around a 3.3 star rating. And that's important because we've shared previously that 3.5 average star ratings and above are a good indication that there's support or affirming support for the comments and thoughts in those particular categories. So technically efficiency fell just below that cutoff, but we did want to share that with the board since it did show up on the earlier slide, and also knowing that efficiency is one of our pillars in the assignment planning policy, we just thought it was important to share this piece with our board as well. In this particular thought exchange, we also explored the quantity of thoughts that were coming in based on the particular schools that were involved in the assignment recommendations. And so in this case, you'll see that the largest or tallest column represents the southwestern and western area high schools only. So we do have some recommendations in the plan that impact Apex High School, Apex Friendship High School, Cary High School, and Green Hope High School. And so if any of those types of school names were mentioned, we included them in this data set. And you'll see that that was just shy of a total of 550 thoughts, comments, or questions specific to those particular school recommended changes. The next highest one, around 100 total thoughts or comments or questions, came from the southeastern and southern areas. So those are schools that you might identify with in the Fuquay-Varina or Garner area, schools like Bryan Road Elementary, Herbert Akins Road Middle School, Fuquay-Varina Middle School, South Lakes Elementary, Fuquay-Varina Elementary, etc. So the schools that are in the plan, if a community member mentioned one of those school names, we included them in this total set of thoughts. The next, they round out the categories with Southeast Raleigh, Eastern and Northeastern areas of the county. So those would be the schools that are like Southeast Raleigh High School, Beaver Dam Elementary, Forestville Road Elementary, any of this, there were a handful of recommendations in the Wake Forest and Heritage area. So any of those types of school names that were used. The next was the southwestern and western area, but not including the high school. So when we took the high school comments and looked at them separately, the remaining comments that would fall into this category related to some elementary and middle school recommendations. Schools like Dillard Drive Elementary and Swift Creek Elementary. There's some recommendations related to Dillard Drive Middle, Adams Elementary. So any of those types of school names that were included in thoughts and questions would be represented here. And then the final column on the far right was the central and northern areas. So these are some recommendations that I sort of would indicate are mostly inside the Beltline and a little bit north of it. School names like Buck Elementary, Wiley Elementary. We did have Northridge Elementary as part of this. There were some middle school recommendations related to Ligon and Oberlin and Carnage that are included as well. So if any of those school names were used. We showed this to our board to highlight that we wanted them to see. We are very keenly aware that we received a lot of comments and feedback, not just from the Southwestern and Western area, but particularly related to the high school recommended changes in the original draft. And then we also just wanted them to see the participation and thoughts. The one sort of asterisk I put on this is you'll notice that the total number of comments on this slide doesn't precisely add up to the total number of comments that you saw on the previous slides, because we did receive almost half of the comments that were received didn't specifically mention a school name. It might say something like, thank you for assigning me to a school that's closer to home, but then never actually mentioned the school name. And so we couldn't organize the thought into one of these categories. Or I'm really concerned that the school you're assigning me to is on a different calendar, but didn't specifically name the school. And so we couldn't include those here. And so again, this is just to help our board see the types of thoughts and understand the kinds of questions and categories that we're seeing as people participate. The next thing we did for our board during that presentation at the board work session was to summarize essentially what we heard from the thought exchange specifically. Similar to this virtual public information session, we also held 4 public information sessions after the original release of draft 1, and we'll talk about the takeaways from those in a separate section. But here, what we heard very, very clearly from our community is that there is support for the stability rules in the sense that there's a very large contingency that says we don't want to be reassigned, which we fully understand. However, if we have to be reassigned, we really do like the generous stability rules, particularly a piece about being able to bring the kindergarten, 6th, and 9th grade students in. And we'll talk through those stability rules in a moment. There's also a sort of general consensus and support for any recommendation that allows families to go to a school that's closer to home, that's more proximate to the home. There is on that third sort of line here, a general recognition from the large population that participated in the thought exchange that there's an understanding that we have some communities and some areas within the county that are experiencing high growth, and that's what's sort of driving this need to talk about reassignment. Where there is discord or differences is on how to solve that particular concern. But there is general recognition that we do understand we live in a community that is experiencing high rates of growth in certain parts of the county, and we understand that that's what's causing this need to talk about assignment changes. Another key takeaway was that there was a preference, particularly with areas that have a new school opening in the next year or two, that maybe could we just wait and tackle these reassignments after those or when those new schools open versus trying to get ahead and do these assignments now. And then the last major key takeaway we heard very clearly, and we do understand this concern, is that although there's general support for the stability rules, if we have to go through this reassignment process, there is a concern that those stability rules don't include transportation. And so we shared all of this with our board as just general comments and feedback in the general consensus and census that we sort of felt from the types of comments we were receiving. As I mentioned just moments ago, we also held several information sessions. And so we had 4 particular information sessions across the last week of September and the first week of October. And what we saw there were that we had about 111 total participants in those online sessions. And then after that, really only up until October 11th, because we had to get this ready for publication, we had almost 4 times as many families and community members watch the recordings of those information sessions as were able to participate live. So that gave us a good indication that recording and posting the recordings is a really helpful tool for families. So we're going to continue to do that. As Corrali mentioned, we'll record this session and post it as well. So that let us understand, the rate of participation. And you can see that in some areas we had way more participation with the recordings than with the live session. So again, just knowing that that's a really useful tool for families. You can see that we actually broke them up into regions because there were a number of recommendations for base assignment changes in particular across the county. We wanted to make sure that each sort of region or area of the county, we had sufficient time in each of those sessions to not only present those recommendations, but also take any questions or feedback. And so we did separate out into those 4 distinct sessions. What we heard, the key takeaways from session 1, the types of questions that came up in the session, through the chat and the thought exchange, were generally that no concerns regarding the recommendations in these areas. We didn't really get a lot of feedback saying that we don't like the change. For the most part, there was support or just jumping straight into questions about stability rules. You will see there's a theme through all 4 sessions that clarifications regarding the stability rules is a common theme, and I would expect a similar thing tonight. I would expect that several of you may have questions about how the stability rules work. Happy to answer all of those. There also were some clarifications about recommendations in other areas of the county, because as we get to the end of the session, you'll see there's sufficient time. We did allow families to ask questions about other areas as well as time permitted, and we were able to answer those questions. The second session that focused on Southeast Raleigh, Eastern and Northeastern areas of the county had slightly different concerns that were expressed. Really, there was a general consensus or general concern that was shared related to the fact that communities and municipalities and towns are allowing and permitting developments in areas where we already have overcrowded schools. So as you may have seen in the video, just as a general reminder, as a district, our developers are not held to any standard to set aside land for schools. That's not part of the development process in our county. And so what we'll see is that oftentimes developers will give us a heads up and they'll let us know that they're developing, but we don't necessarily have land set aside that they'll give us to account for all of those new students. And so that was the type of concern that was coming up. Again, clarifications on the stability rules, and again, clarifications about concerns for other areas of the county. When we got into session 3, the questions were much more targeted to that specific area. There were some very specific concerns in the southeastern and southern areas session about the fact that there are no new middle schools in the capital improvement plan for that area. Specifically, schools like Bryan Road Middle School were mentioned, and a desire for something like a Willow Spring Middle School were expressed in the session. There were also several concerns noted and that we captured not only here, but in the thought exchange about Herbert Akins Road Middle School for those families that are being recommended to be assigned from Fuquay-Varina Middle to Herbert Akins Road Middle School, that Herbert Akins Road Middle School isn't the closest or most proximate school for those families. In this session, we also captured and heard concerns about calendar alignment, particularly at the high school level down perspective. The idea that once my student gets into 9th or 10th grade and I have younger siblings, the fact that they're on a multi-track year round while I'm on traditional, families have concerns about the calendar alignment towards that upper end of the grade spectrum in that sort of K-12 span. And then, of course, clarifications on the stability rules. And here we also heard some very specific concerns about the stability rules coming without transportation, which affirms what we heard in the thought exchange, but it did come up clearly in this particular information session. And our fourth and final session for draft 1 focused on the southwestern and western areas. Several concerns were expressed about Green Hope High School not being the most proximate or closest school for some of the families that are impacted by base assignment recommendations as listed in draft 1. There were lots of questions clarifying why Green Level High School wasn't considered as one of the potential ways to solve issues with crowding at Apex Friendship High School, and we'll dive into that in a little bit. There were several questions and concerns and comments clarifying why do we need to do reassignments in 23-24 if a new school is going to be opening in 25-26? Again, those clarifying questions about the stability rules. And we saw again in this particular session concerns about those stability transfers coming without transportation. So at that moment, with our board and with you, we sort of took a moment and paused and said, so clearly we had very large participation in our thought exchange. We had really good participation, not only live, but through the recorded videos of our virtual public information sessions. And so we thought it was a really good idea, and we're going to do this with you as well, to go through some of the most frequently asked questions that we saw. All of the information I'm about to share with you on these slides is already posted to our enrollment site in our FAQ section. So if you look at the FAQ or frequently asked questions portion of our proposal website, all of these questions are included there. But we did offer some visuals and a little bit of additional support to help families understand some of the answers that they were looking for those frequently asked questions. So in the area of stability, we had lots of questions about stability, as I mentioned, clarifying those stability rules. So here we have an example of a question that an elementary parent might ask. If my students who are rising into the 2nd and 4th grade are impacted by the changes in the assignment plan, will they be allowed to stay at their current school? Also, we've got a rising kindergartner that we really wanted to be able to join that 2nd and 4th grader. Will they be able to do that as well? The very short and simple answer to this question is yes. The longer answer is, and here's how you'll do it. So at some point, we'll take the final plan to the board, and that's going to be November 16th. And again, I'll share that timeline toward the end of our session. When the board finally approves and adopts the plan, whatever is officially adopted and approved, we will then reach out to families that next day or so and give them some specific instructions. You've been impacted, the plan has been approved, and you are eligible for a stability transfer because you're currently attending the school, and we want you to be able to stay there if you'd like. And here's how. It'll be an online request process, and we'll send all those links and everything to families once the plan is approved. We did make a special note on this particular question about that rising kindergarten sibling. They will be able to go ahead and put in that request for that transfer as long as they've pre-registered the kindergartner. So any of you that are elementary families that are in that situation where you have a rising kindergartner, or let's say you're rising into 6th or 9th and maybe they're not currently in a Wake County school, you do want to go ahead and take advantage of the fact that the pre-registration window has opened, and you can go ahead and go to your base school and get that student pre-registered so they get a school ID number and all of that. And then you'll be able to put in that request super easy with those older siblings during that very same stability transfer window. Another way a stability question might have been asked was maybe related to the high school situation. So if I'm in one of the high schools that's recommended to have an assignment change impact, and I'm also participating in one of the academies or a special program, it doesn't have to be AOIT. Maybe I'm in the ROTC. And I'm thinking, I've really developed a relationship and I've really plugged into this particular program. I don't want to change. Can I stay? And can I stay through the 12th grade? Again, the short answer to this question is quite simply yes. Same type of longer answer. We'll get that information to those families as soon as the board adopts the plan. We'll get them the link to the stability transfer so they can go online and let us know that they want to transfer. And those transfers will be valid through the end of the 12th grade at the high school level. And we'll talk about it for the other levels in just a moment. This question, I will be honest, and I've shared with everyone, really only got asked once or twice, but we thought it was a very important question to help our families understand how our transfer process works. And it was, once I submit that stability transfer this year, do I have to do it every year? And the short answer is no. Once you put in that stability transfer, it'll get approved and then it'll be valid through what we call the terminal or final grade of that particular grade span. So at the elementary level, that first question that we had about the kindergartner, the second grader, and the fourth grader, all of those transfers would be valid through the 5th grade. Any middle school students that are impacted, if they choose to do a stability transfer, they'd be valid through the 8th grade. And at the high school level, they'd be valid through the 12th grade. And I also indicated in public sessions that these transfers then are valid in such a way that they're hard coded as a transfer. So that becomes your student school assignment, such that if you move, let's say you're one of those Apex High School families, if you move to the Wake Forest part of our county and you have an address update, technically your student would remain assigned to Apex, and you'd need to let us know that you'd want us to undo that transfer. We didn't talk about this a lot in the open sessions, but I've seen several questions come up since we had our sharing of with the board during the work session about, well, why don't you just go ahead and pre-assign everybody and give them their transfers? And the reason we don't do that is we never ever want to assume that a family can make do without transportation. So we want to default to the base assignment that comes with transportation for those families that are impacted, and then say, if you would like to ask for that transfer without transportation, we are happy to approve it. I can even use the word guaranteed. We just need you to ask for it because we want to make sure you understand that the transportation won't be included with the transfer. At this point, we started getting into some proximity questions. I'm thinking about our pillars of stability and proximity and operational efficiency and student achievement. And we had a handful of questions that were asking questions like this. If my student is actually walking to their current school and they're in a neighborhood that's being recommended to be assigned to a different school, quite honestly, that's farther away from my house, why are we doing that? Why are we assigning students to schools that are farther away from their house? If you were here at the opening of the session, you saw the video where we talked about that sort of conundrum that we have, that we're a county-based system, not a municipality-based system. And so sometimes we don't have enough seats at the closest school to your address, but we might have it at the next closest school. And so in this particular specific example, the neighborhoods that are on the north side of US 64 that are being recommended to be assigned from Apex High School to Green Hope High School, Green Hope High School is the closest school to them that has available capacity. It's not their closest school. And we've tried to be very clear that we understand that. This is not an assignment recommendation that's being made based on proximity. It's being made based on facility utilization. So Green Hope High School has some available seats and will have available seats for the foreseeable future. So we feel confident that by assigning these areas that are north of US 64 into Green Hope High School, those families will be able to establish a relationship there and maintain that assignment for the foreseeable future. Separately, we did want to note that those families that are across US 64 are technically outside of any walkable area as far as the district is concerned. As a district, we use the phrase no transportation zone. We don't expressly use the term walk zone. We just use the term no transportation zone, and that's why this looks like a double negative. So what we say is that those areas that are on the opposite side of US 64 are not within a no transportation zone. And so we do provide bus service for those families. So that's another reason why we recommended going ahead and moving those families up into Green Hope. We get that it's not ideal. We get that it's not the closest school for some of these families. In fact, we get that it might even double or triple, the distance to the school for some of these families, but it is a school that we feel confident can support these families in these neighborhoods for a long period of time. You saw in one of our key takeaways from one of our virtual public information sessions, this type of question. Why wasn't Green Level High School considered as an option for relieving the crowding at Apex Friendship High School? For some families, Green Level High School is certainly more proximate to their neighborhoods than a Green Hope. However, Green Level High School has a growing base attendance area. It's already getting close to 100% crowding and will continue to grow over the next 5 years. And so what we did for this question in the slide deck and what we shared with our board was some of this information. So what you'll see on the left is a table that shows the general crowding as of September 6th. So this is not official head count data or anything like that, but we just did a quick snapshot of how crowded are these schools this semester. And you can see that Apex High School is already getting close to 113%. Apex Friendship is over 117. Cary High is teetering there at that 97%. Green Level is getting close to 94%. Green Hope clearly has sufficient capacity, only hovering around the 81% mark. And then Holly Springs High School is getting close to 109%. On this slide, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I'm attempting to trace the pink border line that's around the green, that sort of demonstrates what the Green Level High School base attendance area is. So that outlines the Green Level High School base attendance area. The colors that you see in the sort of yellow to green shading represent the projected growth or positive growth in this particular attendance area over the next 5 years. The darkest green areas represent a projected 250 to 300 new students over the next 5 years. And then it, grades down to something around the lines of 50 to 100 students as you get lighter in color. So as you can see, we know that Green Level already has a very growing or very fast growing base attendance area. So we're hesitant to assign any additional new neighborhoods into this particular school or to use it as an overflow school. Another question that came up related to some of these high school changes is why weren't some of the neighborhoods in the Holly Springs area included for reassignment out of Apex Friendship High School or Apex High School in this plan? And what we noted for families was that Felton Grove High School is projected to open in 25-26. And so the areas that currently attend Apex Friendship High School or Apex High School that are south of US 1 will very likely be impacted by the opening of that school. And so I'll just quickly advance to this slide. We wanted to show the physical location of Felton Grove. That's one thing we realized with all of the feedback from draft 1 is that the maps that we shared initially didn't show the location of this future high school. And we thought it would be really helpful for people to visually see where that school is located. So what you're seeing here is an impact map. And this impact map is something we shared earlier in the planning process earlier in the summer that said as Felton Grove gets ready to open, all of these areas are likely to be impacted. And so what you're seeing with the recommendations for the 23-24 plan is that the areas north of US 1 and north of US 64 that we're making recommendations for, those are areas that we're sort of doing phase 1. So phase 1 of that impact plan is to go ahead and relieve the crowding at Apex High School, or start to relieve the crowding at Apex High School and Apex Friendship High School by taking advantage of capacity at nearby schools. And then as Felton Grove comes along, we'll start looking at those attendance areas that are south of US 1. So it is our, as staff, we are not planning at all to come back to these same neighborhoods in a couple of years and ask that they be reassigned again. That is not at all what we're suggesting. We're simply saying that phase 1, let's go ahead and take care of some of the things that we can with the available capacity in the region. And then phase 2, when Felton Grove is ready, to go ahead and start making some adjustments south of US 1. We also then updated the graphic just to show that this is what the map looked like originally on draft 1. It just did not include where that arrow is pointing, the location of Felton Grove High School. So we again just wanted to share that update. We thought that that was a helpful tool visually for families to see why it is that some of those Holly Springs areas aren't being recommended for reassignment just yet, because we're going to wait to impact those areas when Felton Grove opens up. And so that took us through a lot of our frequently asked questions. And I'll be honest, as we released the new thought exchange for draft 2, we had additional new and unique questions that have been coming in. And so we have been updating our FAQ section, and you can see some of those new questions. And I'm assuming some of you may have those very same questions tonight, and we'll get to those. But where do we go from here from a public engagement process? How do we progress forward? So you're obviously a part of it. We updated our website on October 18th with all of the information. This very same PowerPoint presentation is posted there. We opened up our new thought exchange just saying, hey, do you have any questions, thoughts, comments about draft 2? And we're monitoring that. We are holding this particular public information session to make sure that there's one final opportunity for families to ask staff questions. And then on November 10th, the board will hold their special called public hearing where you can sign up for and participate in that particular process to provide feedback directly to the board. Information about how to sign up for that is usually released a couple of days prior to November 10th. So if you are interested in participating in that process as well, just keep an eye on our website, and closer to November 7th or 8th, you'll find a link where you can sign up to speak. I mentioned earlier that we shared a few updates about the capital improvement plan. And so I wanted to be clear, if you have looked at draft 1 information, this has unchanged. If you haven't had a chance, just walk you through it real quick. The schools that are indicated in orange are schools that are already open and operating, but recently opened. So in 21-22, we opened up Willow Spring High School. It is now serving 9th, 10th, and 11th grade students. In this current school year, 22-23, we opened up 2 elementary schools, Barton Pond Elementary and Apex Friendship Elementary. And we also opened up a middle school, Herbert Akins Road Middle School. So those are open. One of those is multi-track year round. The other 2 are traditional. Going into 23-24, you'll see that we're not opening any new schools. However, the site for Woods Creek Elementary, for any of you in the Western or Southwestern area, the Woods Creek Elementary site will be ready soon in the coming months. And as soon as it's ready, we're going to actually use it as what we call a swing space. And so the students at Bauckham Elementary will be shifted over to that new site, and they'll take classes there for a period of time while their school is being renovated. Once Bauckham Elementary School is completely renovated, the students will move back into their original Bauckham Elementary site. We'll refresh the buildings over at Woods Creek Elementary, and then it'll be ready to open as its own standalone independent elementary school. And so that's projected to be ready for new students in 24-25. And then you'll see that list that's opening in 25-26. So as of right now, we're projected to open several elementary schools: Hilltop Needmore Elementary, Rex Road Elementary, Bowling Road Elementary. Those are all in the sort of Fuquay, that's the southern and southeastern areas of the county, or really southern, mostly southern areas of the county. And I'll show you a map in just a moment. Felton Grove High School, which we've already discussed. Pleasant Plains Elementary, if you know where Scotts Ridge Elementary is, it's very near that campus in the Apex area. We have a middle school opening in the Morrisville area called Parkside Middle School. It will also co-host a couple of the grades for the new Wakerly College of Information and Biotechnology. So that'll be a joint use campus in the Morrisville area. And then there is an as yet to be named high school that will be opening up in the Morrisville area as well. That one is projected to open in 2027-28. We did note that due to market volatility, all of these projects, are subject to change, but right now these are the best projections we have for their construction schedules. What we did not include in draft 1 was this map. And we thought it would be really helpful for families to be able to visualize where these schools are located. As you can imagine, there are some areas where like, well, our schools are crowded. Where aren't we being recommended for reassignment? And it's most likely because there's a school opening in your area in the coming years, and we'd like to, if we can, wait and tackle those changes as those new schools open. But in some areas, the crowding is just such that we really don't feel as staff that we can continue to wait for those 2 more years. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but most of the schools are right here on that far left side. Those diamonds represent the physical school locations. And you can zoom in on this if you open up the PowerPoint on your personal device. The other thing we wanted to make sure we reviewed before we went into any recommended changes for draft 2 was our stability rules. And I think this is where a lot of families have a lot of questions, and rightfully so, because it impacts your independent individual family. So the recommended stability rules, again, recognizing that for the 23-24 school year, we have no new schools opening. We felt as staff that it would be an honoring the stability concerns that we've seen in our thought exchanges and in previous public information and engagement processes, that we would like to recommend that all existing students that are already attending the schools on the day that the board approves the plan, that those students be allowed to stay, use the stability rules to be able to stay at their current school. We recognize this will make the progression or the sort of crowding relief a little bit slower for some of our schools, but we feel like this honors a little bit of both. It allows our existing families to be able to stay in their current school without transportation, if they'd like to, through that 5th, 8th, or 12th grade time period. It also, what we added differently and new as well, is that rising kindergarten, 6th and 9th grade sibling piece. Knowing that families were most likely planning for all of their students to go to school together, to allow those students to be able to do that. And so the way that the stability rules work is they apply to families that are already in the schools, and then they put those transfers in when I send you those links, and you're able to ask for those requests. Any families that are newer to the district that move in after, the assignment plan is approved, they won't necessarily have those stability rules. So the stability rules really capture if I'm already in the school and I want to stay in that school and I'd like to stay in that school, that's who they're for. We were asked to give some more specific details. You'll see that I haven't included any dates here. We're working with our developers to try to get those stability online transfer requests open sometime in November. Historically, we don't open them until about mid-December, but we thought another thing that we could do to sort of settle families' nerves and anxiousness would be to get those out faster. So we are working with our developer to try to come up with a November date to be able to open those stability transfers so that families could go ahead and get their requests in, get their confirmations before we break for the winter holiday, and feel nice and comfortable and assured that that's taken care of. Worst case scenario, we'll open it into December, perhaps let it stay open into January, but best case scenario, we'll open it in November and try to allow as many families as possible to get those requests in before we break for the winter holiday. And so with that, we said, okay, we heard all of these things about stability. So we certainly understand that families do not want to be reassigned in general, right? Families that are being recommended to be reassigned to a school that's closer to home, they tend to be supportive of that. We get comments like, thank you, we can walk to school, or thank you, that makes my morning commute better, or I'm really excited to be able to go to a school that's closer to home. Other families are like, I just don't want to change. I really don't want to be reassigned. And as staff, we completely understand all of those perspectives. At this time, we've shared our answers as to why we've made the recommendations and why we're continuing to make those recommendations. And so what you'll see here is just a walkthrough of a handful of mostly technical changes that came about through some other forms of our public feedback. So what we start with every time we go through these recommendations is just a general overview map so that everybody can see which schools are overall impacted by the recommended changes. The list of schools at the elementary level remains unchanged. We didn't add any schools, we didn't remove any schools, but we do have some technical corrections related to the actual areas that are being recommended for reassignment. And so we'll walk through those in just a moment. Middle school, same. We did not add any middle schools. We didn't remove any middle schools. It's the same list of schools being recommended. Again, a similar technical correction related to a particular sort of geographic area that we wanted to address. At the high school level, some things were brought to our attention through public feedback that allowed us to realize there were a couple of areas that needed to be added in. And so you'll see that Heritage High School and South Garner High School have been added as sending schools, and that Wake Forest High School has been added as a receiving school. So let's go ahead and jump in. Looking at Southeast Raleigh High School, the area that you see highlighted in the circle was what we presented in original draft 1. We recommend assigning from Garner High School into Southeast Raleigh High School. For those of you that are familiar with the area, this represents a portion of the Old Town subdivision. Our intent was always to have the entirety of the Old Town subdivision be assigned into Southeast Raleigh High School. And we realized through feedback and review that a portion of the undeveloped section of Old Town had been missed. And so as a technical correction, more so than anything, we recommended taking the portion that you now see in purple. That's a little bit east of that original attendance area for Southeast Raleigh High School. We're recommending bringing the entirety of what will be the Old Town subdivision into Southeast Raleigh High School. This area is the undeveloped portion of the development, so there are no students impacted by this recommendation, but it does allow for that pre-assignment for this entire subdivision to be at Southeast Raleigh High School. This portion is actually currently assigned to South Garner High School, so that's why that added in that additional school as a sending school. As you can see, we added in the impact to South Garner High School because that is the portion of the subdivision that is largely undeveloped. Currently, it doesn't impact any students, and it's going to be a while before all of those houses build out. So we wanted to make sure we got that assignment recommendation in prior to the completion of the development. And candidly, we really try to do those types of assignments as much as we can when we know a development is coming and we have a way to solve before families start moving in. That is where staff really focuses their efforts. Here you'll see that in the original draft one, this is Beaver Dam Elementary in the pink and Forestville Road Elementary in the green. These are in the eastern portion of the county. We had originally recommended that entire attendance area that you see highlighted in the circle on the left be assigned over to Forestville Road. Through feedback, there were some questions about the portion on the southern edge of that recommended area that's on the west side of 540. That yellow line represents 540. Could that portion maybe remain assigned to Beaver Dam? Does it work from a roadway perspective? Can students get to and from the school from that side? We did evaluate that. And so we're simply recommending leaving those assigned to Beaver Dam. So effectively, we're taking this portion out of our assignment recommendations and saying, leave that area assigned to Beaver Dam. The roadway network allows them to easily get to and from the school, and that way without crossing 540 to go over to Forestville Road Elementary. Most of this land is largely undeveloped or some farmland that's getting ready to develop. So there's not a lot of students impacted by this recommendation. There is an existing neighborhood on the northern edge of this recommended area that will move some students. And so you can see the impact here between the two schools. It does balance out the enrollment over time and allows all of the growth that's expected in both of these base attendance areas to be a little bit more balanced between the two schools. This was a complementary assignment recommendation related to the one I just described. This is a recommendation where the green area represents the current Riverbend Middle School attendance area, and the sort of pinkish purpley area on the right represents the Neuse River Middle School attendance area. That same question came up. Can we not take that portion that's on the west side of 540 and leave it assigned to Riverbend Middle School? We agreed with that recommendation, and we went ahead and included that here as a technical correction. Again, the total number of students impacted is not large because that portion is largely undeveloped or large parcels. So you'll see the change here. It again does balance the enrollment between the two schools, which allows them both to have significant space to take on all the growth that's coming in these particular areas. A lot of development is coming in both of their base attendance areas. And the final recommendation that we had or change was to add in an assignment from Heritage High School to Wake Forest High School. In the original draft one, the same area that you see highlighted in the oval was recommended to go from Heritage Elementary and Heritage Middle School to be assigned to Wake Forest Elementary and Wake Forest Middle School. It's mostly undeveloped. There's some construction that's occurring right now, but I think there might only be one actual active student living in this particular attendance area. And so the recommendation here is to, before the development is complete, get it assigned to Wake Forest. Well, in the original draft, we did not include the high school recommendation for that feeder pattern alignment. And we did see that in one of our thought exchange comments that shouldn't Wake Forest Middle go on to Wake Forest High School? So we're very appreciative of that feedback, and that allowed us to align this feeder pattern. So this is mostly being recommended based on feeder pattern alignment to the other moves, and the other moves are largely related to facility utilization. And as you can see here, it does a little bit to help some of the crowding at Heritage High School but again, not significant at this time because the development is still being constructed. And with that, those were all the recommended revisions that we had for draft 2. And I will pause for just a moment for for those of you that have hung with me this long, I appreciate that so much, is that we did hear, as I mentioned earlier, that many families are really not in support of being reassigned. And as staff, we fully understand that. We just wanted to make sure that people understood why we were continuing with our recommendations and why we might not be making a change. And so hopefully, although you may not want to be reassigned, you'll understand why we're making those recommendations. So as far as the timeline and next steps goes, from here, we're going to close up this virtual public information session. We'll let our thought exchange run through the end of next week. Then we'll start analyzing, summarizing all of the data, questions, comments, thoughts that we've received from the public through all of those activities, the thought exchange in this information session. And then the board will host its public hearing on November 10th. We'll take all of this information together. If any revisions are needed for the final draft, we'll make sure we share those during the work session on November 16th. And then after that work session, we're planning to take a final recommendation to the board for approval that same night at their board meeting. We've underlined November 16th. For those of you that may not be aware, typically our board meetings are on Tuesdays. This particular meeting has been shifted to Wednesday the 16th to accommodate a school board larger meeting of, I think it's a state school board level meeting. And so the board has shifted this date to November 16th. So we just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will actually be held on a Wednesday. We'll remind you again of all of our public engagement activities that are ongoing until we get to that November 16th mark. And then I'm going to pop up our thought exchange. Corelli, our host, has shared with me that we already do have several questions. So thank you for posting those throughout the session. And I'm going to take a drink of water while she starts to let me know what questions we have. And then we can start answering those.
All right, Ms. Pulliam. I think this first question is referring to policy 4150.
Okay.
Is this only referring to enrollment for this school assignment growth management, or does this apply to any school transfers? And I'm talking privately with Ms. Alexander, so just let me know if I didn't say your question correctly.
It's actually a wonderful question. There's multiple parts to policy 4150. So one part of policy 4150 deals with the assignment planning process and how we develop our base attendance areas and how we, do what we're doing here in terms of a base assignment plan. As you continue on into policy 4150, there are also additional guidelines for staff with respect to just general transfer request processes. And so there are two forms of request for transfer. One is the stability, and that's related specifically to an enrollment plan. And those rules can change from plan to plan based on what's being adopted annually. So those are specific to the fact that I've been reassigned. What are my options for staying where I'm at right now? So those can be modified from year to year. Those of you that have been in the district for a while might know that we've never been able to be this generous when we're opening a new school. Right. So when we're opening a new school, the stability rules generally won't be quite so generous because we do need to send a significant number of students to the new school to get it open, to get it started, to make sure we have teachers, assistant principals, all those kinds of things. But in this case, because we don't have new schools, we're recommending a slightly different form of stability rules probably than we've offered in a very, very long time. Separate from that, every February, late February, early March, we open up a general official transfer window for people to ask for transfers for all kinds of reasons. My hardship reasons, my child needs to go to this daycare. I'm a teacher at this particular school and I live in county and I want my student to come to school with me at my school site. I have family that help me care for my children, that they live over here. Can I go to a school closer to them so they can help me? I need a different calendar. My younger students on this calendar, my older students on a different calendar. I want them on the same calendar. So we have that general period that runs from late February to early March that captures any kind of transfer anybody would want to ask for any particular reason, separate from because I was reassigned. And so the rules for that are also included in 4150. They're just in later sections of the policy. So I hope that answers that question. I can't hear you, Corelli. I'm sorry. I think you're still muted.
Whoops, sorry about that. Next question is, if I don't need transportation next year, can my child stay at our family school? Our 8th grader has had 4 older siblings graduate from Apex High School. He knows the school, the teachers, and we have Apex High School gear. He has been going to Apex High School since he was a toddler. The issue is that the older sibling is graduating in the spring.
Okay, so it sounds like there's enough of an age gap between the next closest sibling and your current 8th grader that they wouldn't automatically qualify under those stability rules. And so, unfortunately, I think you're interpreting those rules correctly. If there's not an existing student who's going to be remaining at the school, either rising into 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, then there's not a guarantee that that rising 9th grader could come in. So that would be something you could potentially ask for during that February window, but obviously with the reassignment in place, it would be difficult for staff to approve that type of transfer. I understand 100% what you're saying, but it's just in terms of the rules and the way the policy is set up, I think you're assessing that correctly, that you wouldn't automatically get that approved.
A few clarifying questions about 4150. Policy 4150 states that all 4 areas are to be balanced, yet operational efficiency seems to trump it. Can you explain a little bit more?
Sure. What we've tried to indicate is that student achievement, operational efficiency, proximity, stability, where at all possible we can accomplish all 4 of those, we're doing a good job. So usually that's going to mean the school's already set and we don't need to do any kind of reassignment. So the large majority of the schools in the district that aren't being recommended for reassignment, they are sort of adhering to that maybe a little bit better than some of the areas that are being recommended for reassignment. When we do have to get into this sort of unfortunate position where we've got crowding and we have overcrowded schools and underutilized schools, we also, as many of you know, are experiencing some serious transportation concerns where we really need to provide some more efficiency to the routing for those systems. We have to start balancing those factors against each other. I will say that as staff, we work extremely hard to make sure that student achievement is not negatively impacted, at least from the balance perspective. If you look at the sub bullets to that particular part of the policy, while I can't say that we prioritize one area over the other, we do work really hard to not negatively impact student achievement with any of our recommendations. But you are correct. This year's plan is focusing more on operational efficiency simply because those are the challenges that we're trying to address in this particular plan that we're faced with in a unique way.
If my child's base school is Olds Elementary and we live 2 blocks from there, would we be in danger of being transferred to Hunter for the 23-24 year? Our address says Olds for both this school year and next, but apparently Olds is capped and the grade my daughter is in. My biggest concern is that I am currently homeschooling my daughter, so the stability rule would not apply for her.
And I'm glad you brought that up. You are correct. The stability rules do apply to families that are already currently attending school. With Olds, the reason I stopped sharing is I'm going to pull up the original draft 1 proposal so I can show you that map. The area that's being recommended to be assigned from Olds to Hunter is an area that's very proximate to Hunter Elementary. And so let me make sure I've got my right. Yes. So pardon me while I pull up a different image. I make you dizzy while I'm scrolling. I apologize. So are we seeing the screen, Corrali? Okay. So what you're seeing here is the recommended area for Olds. So the Olds attendance area that's contiguous with the school right now, we're not recommending any changes for. It's this sort of satellite area that's much closer to Hunter Elementary. And I'll kind of go to the zoom in slide. So it's these addresses that are connected to or continuous with the existing Hunter Elementary school based attendance area. So at this time, I don't have any projections that additional areas would be assigned out of Olds Elementary. We're feeling that this should accomplish what's needed to relieve some of the crowding at the school and take some of the pressure off. For those of you that aren't familiar with Olds Elementary, it's further complicated by its size. If you can see here, its current capacity is 220. So it feels growth much more quickly than other elementary schools might in the area. So I hope that addresses that question, that the area that's closest to Hunter is what we're looking at, not the other areas.
What if my rising ninth grader wants to go to Apex High School while my rising junior stays at Apex Friendship High? Is that possible?
So if I understand the question correctly, you might be in one of those attendance areas where you're being recommended to be assigned from Apex Friendship to Apex High. And if that's a correct assumption about what you're describing, then yes, the older student could use the stability rules to stay at their current school, and the rising ninth grader, if they want to go ahead and go with their friends over to the new school and start a new thing, be separate from their older sibling, whatever the motivation is, then certainly yes, they could go to the base school for their address. They don't have to go with their older sibling. That's just an option that we wanted to make available in case that's what families wanted to have happen.
Okay. Why are those students that applied to Anglo-Magnet High School forced to go back to their base school?
I'm not sure that I understand that question because that is not something that we do. So if a student requests a magnet seat at Enloe High School and is seated with a magnet status at Enloe High School, that would be their school assignment through the 12th grade unless they asked to come back. Now, if someone was base assigned to Enloe and moved out of the Enloe base, then they would be assigned to the base school for their new address. But if a student has magnet status, they should never be forced out of that magnet seat. It would be a choice that the family would make because of transportation or change in interest of the student or whatever those things are that affect families uniquely. We would love for families to go to Enloe and stay at Enloe. We're very proud of that program. All of our magnet programs.
You mentioned that crossing over a highway was not in the best interest of the students. For the students moving from South Lakes to Fuquay, we'll be doing just that. Was that taken into consideration?
So I'm not sure if there was this maybe just looking at some attendance areas. We certainly look at major roadways when we're looking at recommendations, particularly if we think a walk zone might be involved. Sometimes there's natural geographic boundaries that we use to make decisions when we're trying to come up with a balanced approach to, I'm thinking of maybe the Beaver Dam or the Forestful Road area. In that particular area, to balance the crowding between the two schools, we can accomplish it by keeping either side of 540 separate. In other areas, I think with South Lakes to Fuquay Varina, we were recommending bringing an area that was actually currently on one side of 55 that's nestled within the Fuquay Varina Elementary base. We were actually recommending it to join the Fuquay Varina Elementary base. Let me go ahead and show the slide to make sure I understand the question correctly. And if that person has a clarifying question, by all means, share that with our host. But this area here is currently on this side of the or I think that's 55 maybe, or Benson Highway. We are recommending that join Fuquay Varina Elementary. We're looking at this area here. There's an area on the northern edge of the current South Lakes base attendance area that we're recommending assigning into Willow Springs Elementary because the families exit out onto this highway. So as bus transportation and things like that are taken into consideration, they can go right on over here to Willow Springs Elementary. I hope that answers your question. If not, I think Corelli is able to drop my email into the chat so that if you have a very specific question that I didn't quite answer directly, by all means, feel free to reach out to me directly via email and I'll do my best to answer your questions.
I'm dropping it now in the chat for everyone.
Also, if you have a very specific question about your unique family, by all means, let's use email for that. That way you're not sharing any, personal information unintentionally. But if it's a general one that we could apply to all families, please ask those so that we can make sure we're sharing those comments with everyone.
What factors are considered in determining transportation for a specific region? Who qualifies for contracted transportation?
Oh, okay. Excellent question. So the way transportation works, and I'll speak out of turn just a little bit because obviously I'm not in the transportation department, but the general rule is if it's your base assigned school, we work to give you what we call neighborhood transportation, unless you're in what's identified as a no transportation zone. You and I would probably call that a walk zone. I can walk to school. So if I'm in the base assignment area for a school and I'm attending that school, I would get what we call neighborhood transportation. The stops are pretty frequent. They get pretty close to our house, maybe, at the end of the street, something like that. If you have a magnet seat at one of our magnet schools, there's a chance you might actually have what we call express transportation. And what that means is that instead of coming in the neighborhood, and if you can see my finger kind of, hopping in and out of the neighborhood, what we do is we identify common community stops. Maybe it's at a local church or local YMCA. Maybe it's actually at an elementary school parking lot, something like that. We'll go and pick up a group of students. And the reason we call it express transportation is the idea that the route will be a little bit faster because it's not making quite so many stops. It's making one stop and picking up quite a number of students and then moving on. Contracted transportation is reserved for very special and unique circumstances. If a student qualifies under different federal standards due to particular special education needs or something like that, where they can't use a traditional quote unquote yellow bus, they might qualify for contracted services. So those are not generally available to all students. It's very specific to students with very specific needs, and they're almost always supported by some sort of federal programming. And I see that one of our board members has joined us. I'm not sure if we've had a chance to introduce her.
Yes, I wanted to let you all know that Board Chair Lindsay Mahaffey has joined us. Okay. One more, and then I have a few from Thought Exchange.
Okay.
Our base school is changing from Fuquay-Varina Middle to Herbert Akins. Maybe they mean Fuquay-Varina Elementary.
Nope, that's correct. Fuquay-Varina
Okay.
Middle to Herbert Akins Middle.
Herbert Akins Middle, which is year round. We like the traditional calendar given that we also have a high schooler. Why is Holly Ridge Middle being proposed at this traditional option middle school for Willow Spring residents?
Thank you for asking that question in the forum, because it has been posed quite a number of times on our thought exchange, and we probably do need to get this together as an FAQ. If you're not aware, I'll go to this is the map that the person's referring to. So this area here in the southern portion of the county is being recommended to be assigned from Fuquay-Varina Middle, which is on a traditional calendar, to Herbert Akins Road Middle School, which is on a multi-track year-round calendar. So we do recognize that, and we mentioned that some families have experienced those concerns. As you can see here, the current crowding rate at Fuquay-Varina Middle School is projected to be at about 130% if we do nothing next year, which means it's already pretty close to that today. It's in a very high growth area. And so if we do nothing, it's unsustainable for the school. And as you can see, now that Herbert Akins is fully open and we can use all 4 tracks, it has plenty of available capacity. And so the recommendation for this particular area, as the participant mentioned, is being made because this also represents the Willow Springs Elementary School base, which is a multi-track year-round school. So this is more of a K-8 feeder pattern alignment, but we do understand that once we start looking 6-12, that looks a little different. So the reason for the recommendation is space availability at Herbert Akins Road Middle. So that's an operational efficiency on the facility utilization side, and calendar alignment K-8. To your point, the identified traditional calendar choice at this point in time is Holly Ridge, because as you can see, there's just not sufficient room at Fuquay-Varina Middle to allow families to then calendar apply back to the school. So for right now, we feel that we can accommodate the stability transfers in the short term, but we couldn't accommodate additional new applications for traditional calendar. So for right now, if someone wants traditional calendar with transportation, the school sadly closest to this area with traditional seats available would be Holly Ridge. So it's really about space availability right now. You may be aware that Fuquay-Varina Middle is undergoing a renovation. And so once it completes, it's really a new school build on a different site, which was originally supposed to be a renovation. But once that's complete and the school is able to move into its new facility, we'll be looking to expand its base attendance area a little bit west. And so there'll be some more shifts, but for right now, we just don't see that we can continue to offer transportation to Fuquay-Varina Middle from this area and manage the crowding that's coming. And I will say, I'll take a sort of a pause here. I do recognize more than anyone that sometimes the answers that we give don't necessarily satisfy the concern that you have as a family. And I get that, and I understand that. Our goal is to, at the very least, help you understand why we're making the recommendations. We do not want to change people's school assignments. That's not a goal that we have. We just have the complex need to be good stewards of the resources we have here in the district. And so as staff, we're trying to make recommendations that can sustain over time versus short recommendations that will constantly be changing. Because while reassignment once is bad, continuous reassignment or continuous capping, those sorts of things are even worse for families. And so we really do feel confident that the recommendations we're making are those types of changes that can sustain over time. So this one change, and then the goal would be few to no changes in the future, whenever possible.
My student is a freshman in AOIT program in Apex High School. We would like to use the stability rule and let him continue at Apex for his next 3 years. We would like to get transportation service as my work starts at 6 a.m. and my husband travels a lot.
And I thank you for sharing that. As I mentioned, as part of our key takeaways from other areas, that is a common concern that has been shared with families. And right now, as staff, we don't feel that we have the transportation resources to accommodate those requests. So at this time, we're not making the recommendation that stability transfers come with transportation. We've been working with our transportation department as closely as we can and talking with our board members. At this time, as much as I understand and sympathize with the concern that you have, I don't know that the district's going to be in a position to be able to offer that kind of transportation with our stability transfers.
Since so many of the concerns with stability are about transportation, what types of considerations are being made to alleviate this, and why can't this happen before these reassignments are made?
You may or may not be aware, our board has been talking with our transportation department regularly over the last really year and a half about new challenges that are facing this particular section of our industry. And the labor market has shifted things. We just don't have a sufficient number of staff to fully drive all of the routes that we currently have. As if you may be aware, we are a very large district. We have just under 160,000 total students that are assigned to our schools. We have almost 200 individual school sites. And so while we do have a very complex transportation system and we try to be as efficient as we possibly can by using buses over and over again, you might hear about those multi-tiered routes, some loop backs, make a run in one neighborhood and then go run another neighborhood, that sort of thing. We do everything we can to maximize the efficiency of the routes that we have. We're just bumping into a capacity issue where there's just not enough drivers to be able to sustain a really, really complex transportation network. And so you're seeing lots of recommendations in this particular enrollment plan to take some stress off of that transportation network. What's not always obvious as well is that programs like capping really create very inefficient transportation routes. And so those put an added burden on the transportation system as well. So we're working really, really hard to partner with our transportation department and make recommendations that in some areas of the county, at the very least, don't create more stress on the transportation system, but in many areas of the county are relieving some of the stress on that transportation system so that we can add more transportation back to those base attendance routes, those magnet runs, that sort of thing. But it is a very complex issue that's difficult to describe in this type of setting. It just is very, very challenging for us right now. But there are a lot of resources going toward it. I do remember a board member shared with me, we've increased salary rates for our bus drivers, we've added signing bonuses, we've offered to help with some of the finances related to getting physicals and getting the CDL license. So we are taking very unique and innovative approaches to try to support that particular market and those particular employees. It's just not quite getting us where we would prefer to be.
We have a few more about transportation and stability. Is the board more open to more express transportation option for stability transfers?
That's certainly something that we can share with the board. As I mentioned earlier, at this point, staff doesn't feel confident making recommendations that would add more transportation to the system, but we can certainly share that comment, that sentiment, that feedback with our board to see if that's an option that could be explored. So thank you for that.
Okay.
And again, thank you for posting your comments in the thought exchange. That's a wonderful capture tool for us. So we'll be able to incorporate any thoughts that were posted tonight into the overall review, which is very, very helpful for us and for our board members. If you've been posting your questions to the chat, we're working through all of those and trying to see where there's unique questions maybe that aren't duplicated and trying to answer those. So thank you so much, because these questions really are what make the information sessions really powerful.
Okay, about 9 more.
Okay.
The new map causes us to lose our year-round calendar option for middle school, so we won't be able to apply for a year-round middle school. We will have an elementary school student in year-round and a middle school student without the option to transfer for the same schedule. Is there a plan to make sure everyone has an option for a year-round school to apply to?
I really appreciate that question. Again, as I've mentioned, transportation is really a concern for us. What we're not doing is we're not taking away the ability for a family to simply put in a request for whatever school they would like to put in a request for based on their particular needs. So what you're describing is, I still really like the year-round calendar. I want that at the middle school level. The only restriction that we're adding to the system is that we can't guarantee transportation to it. So what would happen is, if you want a school that has a different calendar than your school and you're in an area where, let's say, you don't have a quote unquote calendar application option, all that simply means is there's not an option that comes with district provided transportation. So when you get to the February time period, that's when you'd want to submit this kind of request and say, hey, we'd really like to go to this school based on the year round calendar, particularly if you can provide the transportation. That is a little bit of a catch there. But if you can provide the transportation and it meets all of the rest of our district goals for, approving of transfers, we'll do everything we can to help families have calendar alignment, particularly K-8. It's much harder 6-12, as we described earlier in some of our earlier questions.
How will track assignments be determined for kids that are being moved from Fuquay to Herbert Akins for families that have traditional students in other schools?
So the way the track assignments always work is that you'll work with the principal. And in this case, if it gets approved as suggested, there'll be obviously a large number of students impacted. So we'll make sure that the two schools are working very closely together to have some, common parent nights and that sort of thing. But generally what happens, let's just even say you were a rising sixth grader, is that you would fill out a track interest form. The principal would gather all of those interest requests and then start working to balance those out. They certainly look at the calendar of other siblings at other schools to try to do their best to make alignments where possible. But it's always a site-based decision. So we try to make sure that that's something that the family and the principal can work out together, and that happens at the school level. But in this case, because it is such a large move, we would certainly make a recommendation and have those principals work really closely together to make sure families are well supported in the process, those that choose to go ahead and take the new base assignment. And that would be the case for even just a normal year-round situation. For those of you that might be applying, there are a handful of areas that still have a year-round application with transportation. Those areas you would put in your track requests, and then the principal works to balance out all the tracks and match families as best as possible and all of that. So all families will be aligned if they're both on multi-track year-round. So let's say you've got a second grader and a sixth grader, the schools will work together to get them on the same track.
Is having an understaffed transportation department driving reassignments?
The short answer to that question is no. What's driving reassignments is the need to relieve overcrowding at schools and to prevent additional caps being needed on schools. What we're doing is using transportation efficiency as a backdrop to where we can also look at that and put the two together. That's where we're working to support transportation. But no, the large driver for the reassignment recommendations is mostly related to taking advantage of nearby underutilized schools to address overcrowded schools. There are a handful of recommendations in the central area that are a little bit more about transportation efficiency, but by and large, the majority of the recommendations are being made based on facility utilization.
Why is a traditional option for Willow Springs all the way in Holly Springs more than 30 minutes away at the start and release times?
So that's, I believe, the same type of question that we answered earlier about the reassignment into Herbert Akins Road Middle School, that the calendar option would be Holly Ridge Middle. And that's, again, because Fuquay-Varina Middle can simply just not take on any additional students. There's no space at the school to take on additional calendar application school students. Traditional calendar application students. Ooh, getting a little tongue-tied, I apologize. So at this point, it's just a matter of where there's space to be able to accommodate those traditional calendar requests.
Will the
As I
county?
mentioned earlier, the transfer process is still a way for you to ask for something that maybe isn't on one of your listed quote unquote application schools based on your family's particular needs. So if you don't qualify for a stability transfer, or that's not an option that you want to exercise, you still will have available to you the traditional transfer request period. Also, if you aren't quite sure whether or not you're going to be able to make transportation work for your stability, assignment. For example, we've been talking about Fuquay and Herbert Akins Road Middle. If you want to go ahead and put in that stability transfer for Fuquay Varina Middle when that window opens in November or December, just to make sure you've got that taken care of. And then as you talk about it as a family and have other conversations and you get closer to February and go, you know what, we're okay with the base. Let's go to the base. You could always put in that request during that period to ask for quote unquote back to base. That's what it's called on the drop down list. And that could be approved at that time as well. And so again, those are some of those individual questions we're happy to work with families on as we get closer to decision time.
Fuquay Varina Middle is going to be rebuilt in a new location. Why make this change now when this will likely be more impacts?
So a good question. And this is really similar to some of the questions that we had in the Apex High School area. Felton Grove's not opening up for a couple of years. Why are we making the assignment changes now? As we look at the growth in the region, we know, and let me pull that map back up again. As we look at the growth and the developments that are coming in the region, you can see that Fuquay Varina, can you see my mouse? Okay, you can see that the current site for Fuquay Varina Middle School is here. The new site will be a little bit south of there. I'm losing it on this map. It's a little bit too zoomed out, but it'll be a little bit south. But the growth in this portion of the county is continuing. And so we know that we'll most likely have to expand the base attendance area for Fuquay Varina Middle more to the west. And so this assignment change into Herbert Akins Road Middle will be sustainable over time to allow to accommodate for some of the growth that's coming in this area as well. So it is a complex issue, but we're again making recommendations that we feel confident can sustain for the foreseeable future so that families are not impacted by multiple reassignments in short periods of time. We do have a general rule of thumb that we try very, very hard not to assign any areas more frequently than once every 3 years, but that's not even as frequent. We'd rather just not reassign you at all, right? But if we do have a high growth area with lots of new schools opening, that would be the most frequently that we would reassign families. But in this area, we're trying to avoid that altogether, make this one reassignment and then let it sit. We can't hear you, Corella. It's okay.
I have multiple windows open. It's
You're
a
fine.
mess.
Tracking questions is hard.
Family has students in grades 11, 8, and 5. When current 5th grader goes to high school, do the stability rules allow him to join sibling who will be a senior?
Okay. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, so catch me if I'm getting it wrong. The idea is that I have a student right now who would qualify for one of the stability transfers, since you want to take advantage of that. And then over time, a couple of years from now, you'll have another student who will finally be old enough to join that student, maybe in their last year or two of high school. So what you'll do is now you'll do the stability transfer to ask for the student that's impacted by the reassignment. A couple of years down the road, our current regular everyday transfer policy, the one that opens in February, that does have a rule that says we'll work to keep siblings together. So at that point in time, you would just put in a regular transfer asking to join the sibling when that student's rising into the 9th grade, and we'll be able to approve that.
I remember to unmute this time.
We really do appreciate all of you sticking with us. We know it's been a lot of information, a lot to absorb, but your questions really make these powerful information sessions.
If there is space at Holly Ridge Middle School, why not shift students from the western side of Fuquay to that area? Our students in Willow Spring will have to drive past Fuquay Middle to get to Holly Ridge.
And I hear those types of questions very clearly. We've got a lot of growth that's also coming down. As you can imagine, that same area that's being impacted by Apex Friendship High School and the future opening of Felton Grove is also continuing to grow in a more south, sort of easterly direction. And so we're going to need some space for that over time as well. It's a very complex, I'm not trying to downplay the question, but right now we need to reserve that space for the additional growth that's coming on that side of the county so that we don't then yet have to reassign those areas a second time. And we do hear very clearly that some of our families in some of the proposed areas are going to be going to not their most proximate school. And while we work really, really hard to allow families to go to their closest school, it's not always possible. And I think that was shared in the opening video, and we've talked about it quite regularly, that in that balance, we do our best to have you all go as a community to the same school. When possible, we like for you to be able to go to your closest school, but the nature of the way that our county system works, that's not always possible. And so we hear that, we understand that, and we recognize that that is a reality for families.
A few of the other questions on Thought Exchange, Ms. Pulliam, was about having siblings and the stability transfer for siblings. So you have answered those already.
And again, you've dropped my email in the chat box so that if anybody wants to send me a specific question, I'm happy to answer those.
Drop it again now so everyone can see it. Does anyone have any final questions? We have about 1 minute left. Again, this will be posted tomorrow morning on our website and on YouTube. Our website for this enrollment proposal is wcpss.net/2023 enrollment proposal. Just one last question. Will the county rezone again next year due to all the new construction in the South Lakes Elementary area?
Okay. Thank you for that question. Our plan is that the assignment recommendations we're making for the coming school year will help us to manage the growth over the next year, and that by the time we get to 25, 26, there'll be additional elementary schools opening that will provide relief to the additional growth that's coming in the South Lake space. But you're correct, that particular attendance area is growing even faster than was originally projected. And as we leave, I just wanted to share this because I know you've been verbally saying it, Corrali, but these are the websites that you were referring to. So the WCPSS.net 2023 enrollment proposal site is where you can go to get everything. That's your one-stop shop to get access to the PowerPoints, the video recordings, the frequently asked questions, the thought exchange link. Really, that's the best place to go. The address lookup tool, everything is hosted on this site. If you want to go straight into the thought exchange, I think most of you have already done that. You obviously know what that link is now at this point in time. And then, of course, the recording from tonight will also be posted to the same general website as well. Just follow the arrows and you'll find your way to those recordings. And if you'd like to watch the recordings from the original draft, they're still posted as well. And the original thought exchange, while you can't add thoughts to it, you can still go in and explore all the comments that were originally posted to the draft one thought exchange. That's still available as well as a resource for those of you that are interested.
Ms. Pulliam, would you like to have 3 more?
I'll kind of go to the families that have been with us this whole time. We really, really appreciate you. We're at 7:30, so we want to honor that time. We will keep the recording going so that as we answer these 2 or 3 last questions, we'll make sure that they're included in the recording. But thank you again so very, very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate the thoughtful feedback, the questions, the comments. We really know that this helps other families as well to get those same answers to those same questions. And as I say multiple times, we do understand and respect that we don't always end up making a recommendation that aligns with what you individually are hoping for your family. Our goal is at the very least for you to understand better and have a more clear explanation as to why the district is making the recommendations that they are in an effort to provide long-term stability for families, even if there's some short-term turbulence.
Just 2 more. Why is Davis Drive Middle not the traditional option for Salem Middle, as both go back to GHHS?
And thank you for that. We actually have been noticing that there are lots of comments, and I probably need to be careful about saying lots, but there are several comments in our thought exchanges that we've been capturing between draft 1 and draft 2 about, oh, we'd like to be reassigned. Why can't we have, a different traditional calendar option? And so although they're not included in this year's plan, we are certainly looking to review all of those questions that have come in for families about being added to an enrollment plan in the future. And we are going to take those under advisement. In the interim, I would just simply say that with our concerns about transportation, it may be unlikely that we would continue to add new transportation routes for calendar applications, but that would not preclude you from asking for it through transfer. So if it's a situation where you feel like you could provide transportation to a school, I would highly encourage you to use the traditional transfer process, explain your hardship reasons as to why you'd prefer to have that over the quote unquote calendar option for your address. And we'll do absolutely everything within policy to review and support those types of transfers. I can't guarantee those, but we would certainly look at those to see what we can do to help families.
Just one last question. I think it's clarifying for Fuquay Middle. What other options were on the table for Fuquay-Varina Middle students with no traditional alternatives? It was our previous understanding that no changes would be made until Fuquay-Varina Middle was moved.
Oh, okay. Um, so I'm not sure about what those understandings, where those come from. You may or I'm relatively new into the department, so we're working with the current enrollment plan. But right now, what was on the table was the idea that if you could use the stability transfer, that would allow you to stay at Fuquay-Varina Middle for traditional. And then as the families that would take the reassignment to Herbert Akins Road Middle, they would obviously go on to the year-round calendar. But right now, that was sort of the middle ground, recognizing that Holly Ridge is a little bit further away for a traditional calendar application school site. We did want to recognize that those families that could access the stability transfer would at least be able to do that and remain at Fuquay if possible. And we recognize that that's not an option for everyone. We recognize that many families do rely on district transportation, but that was sort of the middle ground that we came to try to keep that traditional option for families that are already attending the school.
Thank you all. I hope you have a great night. I'm adding here one more time Ms. Pulliam's email, and that'll be it for us tonight. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much. Have an enjoyable evening. We appreciate
Night.
you very much.
Thank you. Good night.